Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you doing, brothers? You okay? Allah yubarik feek. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin ma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, I'd like to say Jazakumullah khairan for the invite. It's my second time in Crawley, so I'm not used to seeing familiar faces. Alhamdulillah. So, just to introduce myself, my name is Muhammad Naeem Safdar, known as Bro Haji from Birmingham. So, hence why you might hear the accents a bit different, but subhanAllah, I'm sure you can understand what I'm saying. So, today's topic will focus on the life and history of Salahuddin Al-Ayyubi Rahmatullah alayhi. Now, I want to make this as interactive as possible, so I might sometimes ask questions, and if you don't answer, it's fine. It's just to keep you engaged, because it'll be quite academic based, reference based, so I want to get your input and interaction. Now, before I start, and I know it might be quite direct, but if you don't want to answer, it's fine. Has anyone watched the movie Kingdom of Heaven? Show me a raise of hands, yeah? So we've got a number of brothers who have watched that particular Hollywood movie. So a lot of the history regarding Salahuddin al-Ayyubi will be from that lens, right? From that lens. And it's vitally important that we use our primary sources to understand the life and history of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi. Now, before I go into the sources that I use, does anyone know of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi's background? Does anyone know what his background was? Kurdish. Okay, did anyone know that? He was Kurdish, not Arab. Okay, so he was of Kurdish background. And that's vitally important to sort of hone in on that point, because as we are following the developments, it's a bit close, isn't it? How far you want it? That's fine. Okay, echo wouldn't, inshallah. Close it. So is that clear enough? Okay, that's better. Yeah. So the current issue in Palestine, in Gaza right now, is paining the believers. Every day we're following the developments, and we're seeing a humanitarian crisis, famine, and loss of life. Almost, if not above 30,000 of our brothers and sisters have been, killed in this incursion by the Zionists. But the point I'm trying to raise is that Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi wasn't Arab, wasn't Palestinian, you see? But the cause of Palestine is an ummah's cause. Like all the believers' causes, whether it's Kashmir, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan, it's an ummah cause, it's a collective cause. So Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi was born, in Iraq. He was born in Iraq in a town called Tikrit. Does anyone know where Tikrit is? Tikrit? Iraq. But in the Anbar province of Iraq, so which is western Iraq. Okay, so it's an Anbar, which is predominantly Sunni, whereas the northern side you got Kurdistan, you got Mosul, and then the southern and Baghdad is obviously mixed, and southern is predominantly Shia. Now, in 1099, prior to the birth of Salahuddin, prior to that, we're going before. So we'll have a foundation laid. We know the history prior to Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi. There was a council in France. Okay, there was a council in France, and what happened was during that time, the Muslims controlled the Greater Sham, Ash-Sham region. So when we hear Sham, we think just Syria. But when we talk historically, we're talking about Ash-Sham, which includes Jordan, includes Palestine, which includes Syria, and which includes Lebanon. And that was in the control of the Seljuks at the time. Okay, the Seljuk Empire were Turkish Sultanate Emirate. Now, the council in Europe, I think they call the Council of Clermont, is that Clermont, yeah, so the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II, so this name is very, very important. Pope Urban II gathered a council, and he called for what they called was a crusade, to take the land where Jesus was born and the surrounding areas from the Saracens, from the Muslims basically. And it was a religious duty, and if you partake in this crusade, your sins will be forgiven. And you have to remember, Europe at that particular time was very religious. The church was very involved. The Pope was the head figure, and the kings that obviously followed used to follow whatever the Pope says. So it was a crusade called by Pope Urban II, and he uttered a very important phrase, and I'm sure you've all heard it: God wills it. So God wills this crusade to go out and take back the land of Jesus Christ from the Saracens. So that's just a brief history. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi wasn't born at this time when this crusade was launched, the first crusade. And the Islamic lands at that time, unfortunately, it was very similar to our reality that we see today. So as you know, the lands now are nation states, right? So historically you had the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the nation states were built thereafter. Similarly, in the time of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah, every, qata'a, like every particular strip had its own ruler. Like you had the land of Mosul, he had his own ruler. You had the Anbar province had his own ruler. Asham had his own ruler. Like there were multiple states. So the Ummah was pretty divided at that time. Even though the spiritual head was the Abbasiyya, so the Khilafah Abbasiyya, but really there were independent sultanates, independent emirates, and it was just a mess. And no one really had the power and the capability to challenge the Crusaders. Because the Crusaders took over Baytul Maqdis and the surrounding areas, and they had what they called principalities. So they had about 4 principalities. You had the Kingdom of Jerusalem, you had the Principality of Antioch, so that was like Turkey and Lebanon. Then you had another one, I think was in Kerak. And there were various principalities which ruled over. So when we think of the Crusaders, don't think that they just ruled Baytul Maqdis. Okay, they didn't just rule Jerusalem. They ruled the whole Sham region. Now, the sources that I'm going to use are going to be from 3 primary sources. I think 2 primary, in fact, but the third one could be also classed as primary. So there was a personal secretary of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayh named Bahaddin ibn Shaddad. Has anyone heard that name? Bahaddin ibn Shaddad. No one else has heard that name? So he was born in Mosul, an alim, Shafi'i, and he was the personal assistant of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayh. He was his personal assistant. So a lot of the events that he wrote in his book, the first book which we're going to use, is An-Nawadir al-Sultaniyya fi Mahasin al-Yusufiyya. Okay? An-Nawadir al-Sultaniyya. It's a primary source. So Bahaddin ibn Shaddad was there. So it's not as if we're relying on someone 100 years later or 50 years later. It was in fact a secretary of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayh. So Bahaddin ibn Shaddad is one of the sources we'll use from the book An-Nawadir al-Sultaniyya. The second source from where my script is gathered is from a scholar called Ibn al-Athir. Have anyone heard of Ibn al-Athir? Right? He was an alim Shafi'i as well, Kurdish, funny enough, both of them were Kurdish. And he wrote a famous history book called Al-Kamilu fi Tarikh. Al-Kamilu fi Tarikh. Very important book. And he was also in and around the time of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi. So it's very primary. So all the events that they documented, these 2 individuals were there. So very important that we use these sources as our benchmark. Why is that? Because I mentioned at the start, and why did I mention about the kingdom of heaven? Well, why did I mention that? Because people now, the narrative that's been portrayed is going to be from when, is it Johnny Depp, is he? The one that starred as Balian? I can't remember who he was, but whoever's watched it, that famous Hollywood actor, he was starring as that, the main character. Orlando Bloom, that's it. Orlando Bloom, thank you.
I said Orlando Bloom.
Oh, no, you said Orlando Bloom, okay. I heard Orlando Bloom from somewhere. But yeah, so it's Orlando Bloom who starred. So this primary source, 2 primary sources, you got An-Nawadir al-Sultaniyya, and these books are translated, Kamil fi Tariq is in the second book, but the first book is. So if whoever really wants to read it in depth, please purchase that book. It's called The Majestic Mahadir al-Sultaniyya, Mahasin, like his virtues. So go purchase that book. The last source is a book called Al-Rawdatain fi Tarikh al-Dawlatain. Fi Tarikh al-Dawlatain. And this was written by Abu Shama al-Maqdisi. Abu Shama al-Maqdisi. Now the book was in connection to 2 states. So the translation is the gardens in history of the 2 states. Okay? And the 2 states he's referring to is the Zengid Empire. The Zengid. Have you ever heard of this? Anyone ever heard of the Zengid Empire? There you go. So if you haven't heard of the Zengid Empire, you must have heard of Nuruddin Zenki. Okay? Nuruddin Zenki. And we're going to the history where Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi's connection is with Nuruddin, etc. Now I know there's a Salahuddin, like an Ertugrul, isn't there, recently? I don't know whether someone's following it or watching that. Is anyone watching that series of Salahuddin, made by the Turkish directors from Ertugrul? So don't rely on that too much as well. Just primary sources is always key. So let's talk about the great man himself. Where was he born? What year was he born? Who was his father? His upbringing? so that you get to know the great leader, rahmatullah alayhi. So he was born 532 years after the Hijri. 532 years after the Hijri. And his name, so Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, Salahuddin is a laqab. A laqab is like an honorific title. Does anyone know his actual name? No, I'm trying to make it interactive because it's going to be a lot of information. Yusuf. So his name was Yusuf. Okay? So anyone that sort of memorizes, please remember that name because we need to know these individuals to have a connection with them. Yusuf was his actual name. Now his father was born in Tikrit, as we mentioned, in an Anbar province in Iraq, western Iraq. And his father's name was Ayub bin Shadi. His father's name was Ayub bin Shadi. And he had an uncle who was his father's brother named Shirkhu. Okay? Very important. This name very, very important because he nurtured Salahuddin al-Ayyubi as well as his father. But you notice in the campaigns that sort of made Salahuddin the man he was, his uncle Shirkhu had a very, very important part in his life. So what happened? Ayub bin Shadi, obviously a Kurdish general, in the army of the Zengid Empire. So he was an army, or he was a commando in the army of a famous, important ruler, which many need to know, Imad al-Din, who was the father of Nur al-Din. So Ayub bin Shadi was in his army, and so was Shirkhu. And his laqab, was Asr al-Din. So you see these laqabs that you're hearing a lot. So you got Salahuddin, his father was Najmuddin, and his uncle was Asr al-Din, the lion of religion. And Najmuddin is the star of religion, and Salahuddin is the rectified religion. So, and these titles are well deserved, by the way. If you look at their life and history, well deserved. So what happened? Nuruddin Zenki's father, Imad al-Din, was what you call the Atabeg of Mosul and that northern part of Iraq. Okay, he was the Atabeg, meaning you must have watched Ertugrul when they said, Bey, or Osman Bey, and it's from the Turkish word. So he was the Atabeg, the main head of that part of Iraq. Governor, the Wali of Iraq. He moved to Mosul. So from Tikrit, he moved to Mosul now. So he's getting raised by his father in Mosul. Mosul is in northern Iraq, the second biggest city in Iraq. And he moved there as a child, and then thereafter from Mosul, they moved to Syria. So from Tikrit, western Iraq, northern Iraq, then they eventually moved to Ash-Sham. Now he was educated and raised by his father. So his father nurtured him. And signs of leadership. Zabel, you want to move on? Zabel? Yeah. Okay, Allah yubarik fik. Shukran alhamdulillah. So he was educated and raised by his father, walillahi alhamd, in Ash-Sham. And signs of leadership was apparent at an early age with Salahuddin. His father recognized that there's some signs of leadership. Very devout, very strong, very powerful. They had numerous mashayikh that he was studying with. So Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi wasn't just what you see with a sword in hand, on his horse, taking back these qal'a, these fortresses in Ash-Sham from the Crusaders. He was, at this precise moment, if he was alive in our time today, he would be classified as a sheikh. No doubt about it. He would be classified as a quote-unquote sheikh. Knowledgeable. He studied with numerous mashayikh called Sheikh al-Asfahani and numerous mashayikh that nurtured him, etc. Now, another important point I'd like to mention, and I think this is vitally important because we're talking about his education. You must hear about the theological school, the debates that you have amongst brothers. He's Ash'ari and he's Maturidi and he's Athari and or Salafi and whatnot. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi was from the theological school of the Ash'a'ira. Okay? From the Ash'a'ira. And the reason why I'm mentioning it is very important. It's because we as Muslims, when we have issues as we have prevalent in our lands today, the kuffar don't care whether you're an Ash'ari, whether you're a Maturidi, or whether you're an Athari. The cause of the ummah is the cause of the ummah. Remember that. So when you find fanatics from various spectrums who try to promote, okay, he was from this school or he was from that school, believe you me, I assure you, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi didn't think like that. He was thinking that there's crusaders at our doorstep. We've got Muslim lands that are occupied under the control of the crusaders. Our aim is to liberate these lands and free the blood of the Muslims or save the blood of the Muslims from the oppression of the Crusaders. So Salahuddin's education at the time when he was growing up was from the Ash'a'ira or from the school of the Ash'a'ira. So let's go into now his teenage years. Okay, let's go into his teenage years. So as I said before, I'm using two primary sources and a third one could be classed as secondary. So you got Nawad al-Sultaniyya by Ibahaddin ibn Shaddad, you got Kamil fi al-Tarikh by Ibn Athir, and you've got الروضتين في تاريخ الدولتين by Abu Sham al-Maqdisi. So, has anyone heard of an empire called the Fatimiyun or the Fatimids? Egypt. Anyone heard? I'm not getting much interaction from this side, so has anyone heard of the Fatimids? No. Okay, so the Fatimids were a North African dynasty, but they controlled huge amounts of territory in the northern part of Africa, and they also had some control in the Sham, and I think the Hijaz as well at some point as well.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Mainly Qahira.
Qahira. So they had in northern Africa and they had parts of certain areas. Now they were Ismaili Batiniyun. Ismaili are a branch of the Shia, of Shi'ism, but they actually are classed as apostates, or if not deviants from the school of the Shia. So you got the Twelvers, and then you got different schools. The main body is the Twelvers, but they were Seveners. They're called Seveners, and they believed in like reincarnation, and they believed in all sorts of nonsense. So they were ruling that part. So what happened was there was a leader called Shawwar. Shawwar was the leader of the Fatimiyun. Now remember, as I mentioned, where was Salahuddin? If you were paying attention, where was Salahuddin at his teenage years? He moved from, it was in the Sham, under the tutelage of Nur-ad-Din Zinki. So his father, Ahmad-ad-Din, passed away, and Nur-ad-Din's taken control of the Zengid Empire. So there was some trouble brewing in Egypt between the Fatimiyun. And there was a ruler called Shawwar, and there was a man, and it says here, this is page 75 in my book, it says that the moving to Misr the first time. So they went 3 times, by the way, to Misr, and I'll explain why did they keep going back to Egypt, the reasons why. And he mentions, وَكَانَ السَّبَبْ ذَلك أَنَّ الشَّوَّارِ وَزِيرُ الْمُصْرِيِّينَ. So Shawwar was the wazir. At that time, the wazir was the actual rulers of Egypt. So Shawwar was the ruler. كَانَ قَدْ خَرَجَ عَلَيْهِ إِنسَانٌ يُقَالُ لَهُ الدِّرْغَامِ. Or Dargham, sorry. That there's a person called Dargham, and Dargham took him over. Just took over his post. And this Shawwar wrote to Nur-ad-Din, and he goes, give me some support. Like, I've been taken over, this Dargham, or Dargham's taken over, I need some assistance. So what happened? Shirkhu, which I mentioned before, who's Asad ad-Din, who's the uncle of Salahuddin, was entrusted to go to Egypt to sort this problem out for Shawwar, to go sort out this problem. And I'll tell you why the Sunnis or Ahl Sunnah got involved, because it was very strategical. This involvement of the Zengids into the affairs of the Fatimiyun was very strategical, and you'll understand why. So Salahuddin was a teenager at this point, and he mentions here, and this is in page 65, he mentioned that Salahuddin was asked by Shirkhu to go, but he didn't really want to go. So Salahuddin didn't really want to go, he didn't fancy going. But because his uncle needed him, he goes, okay, no problem, I'll support you, my uncle, and I will go into Egypt, and I will support you in this campaign. So they went with an army, not just them two, they went with an army. Nur-ad-Din entrusted an army, and they went there. So, long story short, Shawwar was put back into power. So they defeated Dargham, and they put him back to power now. So Shawwar's in power now. And why did they get involved internally in the affairs of the Fatimiyun? Because you have to remember, the Crusaders were in the northern part of Sham, right? Lebanon, Jordan, and northern, southern Palestine. So if there were some internal affairs brewing in Egypt, which at the end of the day, the population of Ahl Sunnah was still in Egypt, bear in mind, even though the rulership was Fatimiyun, Ismailiyun, it would have caused a snowball effect where that land would have been used as a sort of garrison to attack Syria and attack Hijaz. Because if you look at the geography, right, Misr is right next to the Hijaz. If you cross the Red Sea, you're in Hijaz. So it was important that that particular area was defended, because for them to have weakness in the Sham would have been easy picking for the Crusaders to expand their empire. So they took over Dargham and they put Shawwar back in power. Now, it mentions that when Shawwar took power, he was playing 2 games. He was playing games with the Muslims, and he was playing games with the Crusaders. So he was basically giving information to the Crusaders, and at the same time, he was giving information to the Muslims, and he was playing both parties. So he just wanted to stay in power. His old aim was, I want to stay in power, no matter who I impress or who I displease. So he was playing 2 fields, if that makes any sense. So Asad-ad-Din returned back to Asham, and Nur-ad-Din heard that the Crusaders were launching into Egypt again. So they've got another problem on our hands. So what do we need to do? We need to secure the borders, we need to secure the ports, and we need to repel this Crusader sort of threat. So Asad ad-Din went back. The Crusaders heard what happened, and Asad ad-Din told them, you need to go back. That's it. And Asad ad-Din stayed in Sham now. So, subhanAllah al-Azim, the treachery of Shawwar is apparent now. He's not sincere. He's one time playing with the Crusaders against the Sunnis or the Muslims, and then at the second time he's playing against the Crusaders they're playing with the Muslims against Crusaders and vice versa. So one time, Asad ad-Din and Salahuddin had enough now. That's it. So he mentions, and this is all documented, it's all here, so if anyone was interested, it's all here. You could buy the book, you could get the translated version. So he mentions, وَكَانَ الشَّوَّارِ يَرْكِبُ عَلَى الْقَاعِدَةِ وَوُزَرَائِهِم. So one time, Shawwar was riding on his horse, and he was quite extravagant. He had drums playing, and he had, obviously, extravagance to show his power. So Salahuddin and Asad ad-Din are there in Misr, right, looking after the affairs just to make sure that there's no issues, not the Crusaders are going to come in and whatnot. So Salahuddin met him on his horse, he rode side to side, came next to him, grabbed him by his collar and arrested him. So then Asad ad-Din with the Muslims, because they weren't alone, they had the Muslims were there to defend Egypt. So the Muslims then overpowered the Fatimiyun, took Shawwar to a tent, interrogated him, found him guilty for treachery, and executed him. So Shawwar is at the picture now. That's it, finished. So now Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah are in control of Masr. Okay? And Asad ad-Din, who was the uncle of Salahuddin, Shirkhu, then donned the Wazir clothing. So anyone watch Ertugrul? Put your hand up, it's okay if you have. Anyone watch Ertugrul? There you go, I'm looking at the back here. There you go. There are two cars, yeah, Wallah al-Azim. Good, but whoever has, do you notice when Aladdin, by Ala ad-Din, the Seljuk Wazir, whenever he had a Wazir or a governor in the border areas, what did he used to give him? He used to give him a robe, right? Do you remember? Did anyone watch it? He used to give him a robe and he used to wear the robe, and he was now settled as the Wazir. Exactly what happened with Asad ad-Din Shirkhu. Once you wear the robe, you are now the Wazir of that province. You rule that province. So, now Asad ad-Din is in control, Salahuddin Ayyubi Rahmatullah is there, and Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah are now in control of Misr. So Asad ad-Din Shirkhu, unfortunately, he mentioned here about his death, that he used to love eating red meat. He was very extravagant in eating red meat, which caused him problems with his health. Okay, caused problem. Asad ad-Din Shirkhu caused him very much issues with his health. And on top of that as well, just to get it out of the transparency, Bahad-Din ibn Shaddad mentioned it, he used to drink wine as well. So you have to remember, everyone has weaknesses, everyone has vices. So Asad ad-Din used to drink wine. There's a famous narration or a famous event. Have you heard of, I'm trying to sidetrack just to keep you, engaged and interactive. Have you heard of Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire? He used to indulge in wine. And he made a promise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when he was going to invade into Al-Hind. He made a promise that I will give up wine if you give me victory. So you have to remember, all of the leaders of the Muslims are not infallible. Yes, they had vices, they were fighting for the cause of the believers and they were upholding justice, but they had their own vices. So Asad ad-Din had health issues and eventually he passed away. So Asad ad-Din Shirkhu has now passed away. Rahmatullah alayhi. Now, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi Rahmatullah alayhi took over, but what he used to do, and he mentioned here, that Salahuddin used to give the bay'ah or give the Jum'ah khutbah. So what happened was, if you had a province that you were governing on behalf of the ruler, even though the Fatimids were still there, they had a weak ruler called Al-Adid. Al-Adid was the Fatimi ruler, but it was just like, like when you just put on someone as a puppet, yeah, he was just a ruler. Because they didn't want to just take over immediately, they wanted to break it in slowly to sort of infiltrate the government. But Salahuddin al-Ayyubi Rahmatullah used to give the khutbah in the name of the Abbasid Khalif called للمستطب بالأمر الله. He was the Caliph in Baghdad, and he used to give the khutbah in his name. So the Abbasid Khilafah then now had its extensions from the lands that they held in Iraq and elsewhere, and now Misr is under their control. So Nuruddin Zenki now, as well as all the other governors that he had, there started to be some controversy and some disputes between Salahuddin and Nuruddin. There was some dispute, and not many people know about it. Bahad-Din ibn Shaddad mentioned this, and I'll get into the details later. Anyone been to Palestine? Anyone been to Palestine? Raise of hands, brothers here, brothers here. Now, Nuruddin Zinki built a pearl mimbar, Now he's settled in Damascus at the moment, but his eyes and his intentions were set on where? Baytul Maqdis. His eyes and intentions were set there. So he built if anyone's been, have you been to the museum next to the Aqsa on the right hand side? Has anyone been to the Aqsa museum? Yes. And you notice when you walk in, you see that pearl mimbar. It was attacked by Australian Zionists in the 70s and it's now destroyed. Nuruddin Zinki built this pearl mimbar in Damascus. And his intention was that when we take over Baytul Maqdis, it was only a matter of when we're going to take it over. I will get the khutbah delivered with this pearl mimbar as like a gift, as a hadiyah for Masjid al-Aqsa. So Bahadin narrated, and he mentions here, وَلَقَدْ حَقَّ إِلَى السُّلْطَانِ. Now, whenever Bahadin ibn Shaddad mentions Sultan, he's not a Sultan yet, but he's speaking in the present tense, because he's going to be the Sultan later. He says that it was narrated by the Sultan, كَانَ بَلَغْنَا أَنَّ نُورَ الدِّينَ أَنَّهُ رُبَّمَا قَصَدْنَا بِالدِّيَارِ الْمُصْرِيَةِ. So what he meant was that it was informed to him. Now, Bahadin speaking to Salahuddin now. Do you remember when I said primary source? He was there speaking to Salahuddin and he's narrating what Salahuddin rahmatullahi was telling him. And he said that the Sultan told me that I've been informed that Nuruddin might attack us, to attack Egypt. There's a little bit of a dispute. وَكَانَ جَمَاعَةَ أَصْحَابَنَا يُشِيرُونَ بِأَنَّهُ يُكَاشِفُ وَيُخَالِفُ وَيُشَقَّ عَصَى. So many of the people with Salahuddin at the time said, you know what, we should fight Nuruddin. Now if he's going to come and attack us, then we're going to defend ourselves. In the end, Salahuddin mentioned that, look, I don't agree with this. And this opinion and this difference lasted until Nuruddin passed away. Now Nuruddin has now passed away. So where is Salahuddin at this precise moment in time? Where is he? Egypt. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi is in Egypt right about now. So Nuruddin had a son, and his son took power, but his son was only a teenager, was a child. And he couldn't defend the lands because now Crusaders, because Nuruddin was taking back territory. And that's when the second crusade was launched. So remember I spoke about the first crusade? When the lands were getting taken slowly, like in Sham and Lubnan and elsewhere, taking all these qal'a, the Crusaders then obviously launched a second crusade. So they asked for reinforcements from Europe. And then now Nuruddin passed away. They were informed that his son took power. What are the Crusaders naturally going to do? Going to attack now Syria because the great leaders passed away. It's our time now to put them on the back foot. So Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi heard about his son called As-Salih. As-Salih was the son of Nuruddin. And Salahuddin thought, that's it now. I need to now take over and impose my rule. And it's fine. For the maslahah of the ummah, sometimes the believers have to make these critical decisions. The same way when, again this is going about the Mamalik, but when Shajar al-Dur, she was a woman ruler, she had a husband called As-Salih Najm ad-Din. This is to talk about connecting a parallel. So when As-Salih Najm ad-Din, who was from the Ayyubis, which was after passed away, she took power and she married a man called Aybak. So when Aybak passed away and Shajar al-Dur passed away, his son Mahmud took over, and then Saifuddin Qutuz took over at the advice of, have you heard, Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam. Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam said, this kid can't rule. We've got the Mongols here, we've got the Crusaders who are still happening, we need to get more power. And Salahuddin made that decision himself. I'm sure he sought mashwara from the ulama. Then he marched onto Damascus and the city peacefully surrendered itself. So now what's happened is that news in so Nuruddin's sons now and the extensions heard about Salahuddin coming from Egypt and taking over Ash-Sham. So he had a province, Nuruddin's sons, in Iraq. So Saifuddin, he was the ruler of Mosul. So he became aware of what's happening now. Hold on here, Salahuddin now his influence is growing. He's moved from Egypt, now he's taken over Sham. Where next? Naturally. And he said that the situation was getting worse, meaning that his influence is getting so powerful. He was fearing, and it says here that he was neglectful, fearing that he would be taken. So he marched out to fight Salahuddin. Believe that. He marched out to fight Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi. So what happened? They fought, and Saifuddin was defeated. So for the greater good, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi then extended his territory now to Iraq. Now he's the ruler of Iraq, ruler of Sham, and the ruler of Misr. So see, the Zengid dynasty now is gone. Now the reign of which dynasty? The Ayyubiyun. Okay, so that province now, so it started with Imad-ud-Din, then Nur-ud-Din, then now it's the Ayyubiyun. So Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi was in power. An important man in the life of Salahuddin, so we were speaking about his uncle Shirkhu Asad-ud-Din, his father, what's his name again? Najm-ud-Din, but his name was Ayyub bin Shadi. Another man, important man in the life of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi was his brother. And his brother's name was Al-Adil. Al-Adil, he was the ruler, one of the rulers of one of his provinces. And he had many good qualities. And when you look into the history, when we go into a lot of the negotiations that he had with the Crusaders, which we'll get to later after the Third Crusade, it was him that used to go and negotiate on behalf of Salahuddin. So remember this name, Al-Adil. But the first ruler after the Salahuddin was his son Al-Zahir. Al-Zahir was after Salahuddin, he was the ruler. And he was very powerful, very influential. So now I'm going to Ibn Athir. So which book did I quote from first? This is from which book? Bahaddin Ibn Shaddad. Now Ibn Athir mentions, and he mentions in the chapter, ذكر التسليم الحلب إلى عماد الدين وأخذ السنجار عوض عنها. So what happened was when Imad al-Din was defeated, okay, he and his brother had a negotiation. So Sinjar is a province in Kurdistan. Have you heard of Sinjar? Sinjar? Anyone heard of Sinjar? Any Kurdish brothers here? Yeah. So this Imad al-Din, there's another Imad al-Din from the Zengid who was still there. They were still causing problems for Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah, and they were negotiating amongst themselves which territory to take, which territory to sort of regroup and take back. And it became so problematic, and I'm going to fast forward a bit, that Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah had to just go take all of them out. Sinjar, Kurdistan, Halab, Der'a, Tadmur, go down. He left the Abbasids because the Abbasids were in central Iraq. So the Abbasids controlled the seat of the capital at the time for the Khilafah was Baghdad. So Salahuddin had respect for the Khilafah, but those governors who were causing him problems, who were causing issues, he took them over and he besieged them, and he eventually became the ruler. Now, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah now, he's got his consolidation, he's got tamakkan now, he's controlling many areas. So where's he setting his sights now? Where's he going to go? To the Crusaders now. So he's got all of this territory now, he's established as the ruler, they're giving him bay'ah, he's giving bay'ah to the Khulafa in Baghdad. Now he's got the go-ahead, because Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah was very diplomatic. Even though the Abbasids had no power, he still used to seek mashwara from the Khulafa, because that's a symbolic, capital of the Islamic world, which we're missing now, unfortunately, which one day will come back. So Salahuddin rahmatullah alayhi went and he started taking back territory from the Crusaders. So he mentions here, this is Ibn Athir now, we're back to Akamilu fi Tarikh. He mentions, ذِكْرُ مَلْكِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ شَقِيقًا مِنَ الْفْرَنْج. Now, have you heard this term, al-Franj? Have you ever heard this phrase before?
Franks.
The Franks. So when you look at the Islamic sources in terms of Salahuddin and any Nur-ud-Din and all the historical accounts, they'll always mention al-Franj. They used to call them the Franks because they were from France, right? Al-Franj. And they used to refer to them as them. They never used to call them as-Salibiyin. That term came later, but they were mostly known in the historical sources from Bahaddin ibn Shaddad, from Ibn Athir and Abu Sham al-Maqdisi as al-Franj. So he took Shaqiq. Then he mentioned that he took various territory around Lebanon now. So Lebanon and Jordan, he's working his way and taking territory. So Ibn Athir mentions Dhikru Hisar al-Beirut. So now he's gone to Beirut now. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah is in Beirut, and he took over Beirut. So now the Crusaders are getting worried. Now they're losing territory. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah was continuous, didn't stop. Even when he took, but look, he could have been a ruler like we find the rulers of today, and he's naturally going to gravitate towards the rulers of today. He had a kingdom, he had 3, massive provinces. He could have relaxed, basked in gold, not give a penny's thought about what's going on in Baytul Maqdis, like the other rulers weren't doing. It was really Imad al-Din that started this revival. And we hope, bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that this revival will come in our lifetime, inshallah ta'ala. But we see the affairs of the Ummah today, it's very problematic, isn't it? That we're every day we're hearing nothing but news about devastation, about sieges, about killing. And bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's always ease after distress. Bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we hope in our lifetime Baytul Maqdis gets liberated. Now, His characteristics now. So what I want to do is now take a step back from the history element, because now it's going to get very, very heavy, because we're going to talk about his Battle of Hattin, the very important Battle of Hattin. Then we're going to talk about the Fath al-Baytul Maqdis. And the main purpose of me addressing you today is the struggles of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, or Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi, once he took Baytul Maqdis. So many would agree, and you could have a show of hands, that when you read about the life and history about Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi, it kind of stops at once he took Jerusalem, isn't it? It's like, yeah, he took Jerusalem and they live happily ever after. Is that a fair comment? Would you agree? Not many people know what happened post he took Baytul Maqdis, about the trials and tribulations, about the worries, about losing territory, that's not really addressed. But inshallah, here you're going to have an account of what he went through. Why am I speaking today? Not only just speaking about his life and actions, to show you the struggles he went through as well, to connect it to our reality, to show you don't despair. Great leaders like Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi had these struggles, problems, losing territory, Muslim lives being lost, besieges, siege. It happened, all what we're seeing today. It's happened, and bi'idhnillah, we will go over this. We will overcome this, should I say, and bi'idhnillah, we will have the glorious majd that we had in the past, bi'idhnillah. So let's talk about his characteristics, right? And Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi never ever completed Hajj. Never completed Hajj. Even though he ruled so much territory, he could have went on Hajj, right? He had the finances to. Man istata', whoever has the ability to. It's easy for him to go on Hajj. Never completed or fulfilled Hajj. He loved listening to, this is the Bahaddin. So Bahaddin ibn Shiddad, now I'm going back to his book, just to give you a bit of context. So how Bahaddin ibn Shiddad sort of separated his book. At first he spoke about his characteristics, his nobleness, his generosity, just about that. Then in the second chapter he talked about his life and history. So what Bahaddin ibn Shiddad's intention was for you to get to know Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. Get to know him first. Let's not talk about his achievements, get to know him before we get to his life and history. So he mentioned that he loved listening to the Quran. And every time he had a majlis, he used to have ulama reciting Quran and speaking about the seerah. That's all his gatherings were about. Always engrossed in worship. When there was a time for worship, obviously tahajjud, we had his spare time. But when he didn't and he was seeking istishar, when he was seeking counsel, it would always be surrounded with ulama and recitation of Quran. And that's very important as well. We have to connect ourselves to the Quran. That's our source, that's our guidance. So that's what Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi did. His justice. He said that so this is dhikru adlahu rahmatullahi alayhi. So his justice now. And he mentioned that he used to sit every Monday and Thursday. Think about it. Why every Monday and Thursday? Those are the sunnah days of fasting. So every Monday and Thursday, he used to have fuqaha and qudat and ulama, and they used to open up, like, you know, people had like complaints. He used to get requests about, you know, any dhulm and any issues that are happening. Mondays and Thursdays, he used to have that as his majlis. He used to say, okay, whoever's got any complaints, any, you know, ishtaka, come to me and I'll resolve it. Justice, which we don't find in our lands, unfortunately. Rather, it's the opposite. They're oppressing us in our lands. The comparison of the Islamic lands and the Western lands is so apparent. You will notice that when you go. There's a certain amount of justice. And Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, rahmatullahi alayhi, said, or kama qala, like I'm trying to quote him verbatim, he says, يَنْصُرُ اللَّهُ دَوْلَةً عَادِلًا وَإِنْ كَانَتْ كَافِرًا. That Allah will aid a just state even if it's kuffar. وَلَا يَنْصُرُ اللَّهُ دَوْلَةً ظَالِمًا وَإِنْ كَانَتْ مُسْلِمًا. And Allah won't aid an oppressive state even if it's Muslim. Shows you the justice, how justice is important in Islam. And Salahuddin al-Ayyubi or Salahuddin al-Ayyubi epitomized justice. And that's why everyone loved him. To this day, it's 2024. And yet look what we're talking about. The adl of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. So that's his justice. Another time, they mentioned that a crusader was captured. So a crusader, a Faranj, was captured. Bahaddin narrates this. And he was trembling. This crusader was trembling because he was captured by the Muslims. He didn't know. He was probably used to what the Europeans were doing. Once you're captured, it's game over, isn't it? It's the end of the day. So he was trembling, and when he saw Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi's face, he started feeling a bit calm. So they asked him, obviously using a mutarjima, like a translator, so how come you're so relaxed? He said, I'm looking at the face of this individual and I know I won't be harmed. And what did Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi do? He freed him. Because you can go. This is the justice of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi. And then there's others that, there's one account And this is mentioned near the end of the characteristics and his khisal. It mentions that a Frankish woman came to the camp of Salahuddin. So what does that mean? So you have to remember, like even though the Crusaders ruled many parts of Sham and the Muslims, they still had to travel, right, to go to different territories. So you must have heard of Qutta' al-Tariq, like the highway robbers. You understand what I mean? The highway robbers who used to wait. And there's a famous scholar in history, now he's mentioned, from the Imams from the Salaf, Fudayl ibn Iyad. Fudayl ibn Iyad. Have you heard that name before? He was a highway robber, believe it or not. He was actually a highway robber. And I think from the accounts, and Sheikh will correct me, that he was on the verge of robbing a caravan and he heard the Quran being recited. And that totally transformed his life. And now he's one of the Imams of the Salaf. Fudayl ibn Iyad. Very popular name. So anyway, so the story was that a woman was camped somewhere and Muslim thieves stole her child. A woman's child, stole her child. So she came and the Wazir or one of the members of Salahuddin's Nadwa or his party, said there's a Frankish woman. So you have to remember, she's left the Frankish territory, she's come to the Muslim lands. Why? Because she sees justice. She didn't go to the Crusaders, she came straight to Salahuddin. And she's crying. So they asked her via a translator, and they said, what's wrong with her? They said her baby was stolen. Her baby was stolen. And they told her that the Muslim king is just, go to him. He will grant you justice. So what happened was, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi heard about this, so he sent for an inquiry, like what's happened. And he found out who these Muslim thieves were. So he paid, because you have to remember back in them days, slavery, it was very, riq was very common. So he paid to get the child back. He gave the child, so the person who went and got the child back, they gave the child to the woman, and the woman was crying profusely, to the point she was saying something. She was crying so much that they didn't understand what she was saying. And then to the point that they saw this scene that everyone started crying, including Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi. And he punished those Muslim thieves that stole the baby. So look, the justice of Islam there is nothing comparable to it if implemented correctly. The Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is full of justice, and that's the point we need to raise. When we hear that word, we tend to take a step back, don't we? Oh, Sharia, because of the negativity. Sharia is comprehensive. It's about good neighbourly relations. It's about justice. About goods. The marketplace has been devoid of deceptiveness, and even includes the penal code. It does. This is the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa taala. So let's not be shy, or if not complacent, when it comes to the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa taala. Don't feel that you have to start making excuses. It's the divine justice of Allah subhanahu wa taala which we need to implement. Now, any questions or any, because I want to get to the history now of his infamous battle of Hattin. Have you ever heard of the Battle of Hattin? Right? Salahuddin, a battle, very famous, and this is very pertinent. Okay, so now he's taking territory upon territory. The Crusaders, with the 4 different provinces, you had Antioch, so these names are very popular amongst the Crusaders chroniclers. Have you heard of Renaud de Chatillon? Have you ever heard of the name Renaud de Chatillon? Have you heard of the name Guy de Lucion? Yeah? Have you heard of these names? Then you heard of Balian, and you heard of Baldwin. So they all had their different provinces, but they all collaborated together. So you have to remember, these were the powerhouses of the Crusaders. These were actual states, like empires, that ruled over Asham for, let's get this out there. The Crusaders were still around even after Salahuddin took it over. They were still there for another 150 years. It was the 99 years, from 1099 until 1192, I'll get to the Hijri later, that they ruled Baytul Maqdis. The Adhan was not called in Baytul Maqdis for over 90 years. 90 years. And even, Qubbat al-Sakhra, the dome of the rock, where you see the gold dome, it's got a crescent, hasn't it? For 90 plus years, they had a cross on there. And underneath the Aqsa, that was used as the stables for the horses and the pigs. Think about that, for 90 years, they used that as the stables and the pigs, or for the pigs. So, what happened? Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi took territories, as I mentioned. He took Ain Jalut, Baysan, Harin, Kerak, and he took all of these territories, and the Crusaders were getting very worried now that we're just losing territory, we need to do something about it. So these are the northern territories. So if everyone's familiar with the geography, Asham, or Palestine as a whole, Baisan and Tiberias and Safed and all of these are the northern areas. So Salahuddin's coming from a Sham, so he's coming naturally this way. It's coming from the north to the south. So the major battle of Hattin happened. And he mentions here that from Bahadin ibn Shaddad, we're going to him now. He says the forces of Islam surrounded the forces of Kufr and surrounded them on the hill of Hattin. So have you heard of Tel Aviv? Tel in Arabic means a hill. So when you hear Tel Aviv, so if you go to Palestine, you notice it's very hilly. A lot of hilltops. So they fought near the hill of Hattin, and that's where the name Tel Aviv comes from. It's very hilly. And near the tomb of Shu'aib alayhi salam. Now, there's a group of heretics called Durzi. Have you heard of the Duruz? Yeah, Durzi. So they renovate Shu'aib alayhi salam. They're not Muslims, by the way. They even profess they're not Muslims. And this part of northern Palestine or Lebanon, Durzi are the main sort of, they inhabit that area a lot. So they gave, and what did Salahuddin Ayyubi rahmatullahi did, or the Muslims, because it was hot, they burnt the sort of dry sort of grass because they surrounded them, so they were naturally thirsty. So they gave up, they got on. So the Muslims defeated them. And there's an account from Akamilu fi Tariq, Ibn Athir mentioned, and it's very important. He says, وَأَخَذَ الْمُسْلِمُونَ صَلِيبَهُمْ الْأَعْظَمَ الَّذِي يُسَمُّونَهُ صَلِيبَ الصَّلُوبَاتِ. Now, the Salib al-Sulubat is the true cross. Have you ever heard of that before? The true cross. Yeah. So the Christians believe that when Isa, I'm going to have to say the shot. When the Christians, or when Isa alayhi salam was crucified, he was crucified on a cross, right? We believe that a man was crucified, right? But it wasn't Isa alayhi salam. If you go to the Tafsir al-Tabari, under the verse which is وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ وَلَكِنْ شُبَّهَ بَلْ رَفَعَ اللَّهُ إِلَيْهِ. All these verses, Imam Tabari and all the Mufassirin go into it. And they mention the story that Isa alayhi salam had a meal, and he said that who would take my place, and I guarantee him Jannah, and one man stepped forward. And then Isa alayhi salam fell asleep, and then there's a mutawaffika wa rafi'uka ilayya. So Isa alayhi salam fell asleep and Allah raised him to himself. So that person had the appearance of Isa alayhi salam, and he was crucified. So this cross, it's just a little cross, just a little like piece of wood. And this was the true cross. So they renovated, they venerated this relic. So they held this, whenever they went in battles, they took this with them for tabarruk. That God would give them victory, or Jesus would give them victory, or the Holy Ghost would give them victory, depending, I don't know, one of the three anyway. So they took that from them. And he mentions, this one will get your attention to. He mentions, فَحَقَى لِي أَنَّ مَالِكَ الْأَفْضَلِ وَلَدِ Salahuddin. So remember I said As-Salih Al-Zahir was his son. He also had a son called Al-Afdal. So he had a son called Al-Afdal. So what happened? It said the son of Salahuddin narrated to who? To Ibn Athir. So we're reading from Akamilu fi Tariq. So you notice when you read the historical books, it always says فَقَالَ لِي فَحَكَى لِي, he told me. So they were there. This is primary source material. This is why it's very important that whenever you go into the historical account, try to seek the primary source as much as possible. Then you'll understand the history comprehensively. Anyway, so he mentioned that his son said to Salahuddin, كانت إلى جانب الأبي في ذلك المصاف. So I was next to my father. So Al-Afdal speaking to Ibn Athir, who's documenting this, and he's narrating this event. He goes, I was next to my father at the Battle of Al-Hattin, or Hattin. وهو أول المصاحف شاهدته. He goes, I was at the first, I was right in the front. He said, هزمناهم, we've defeated them. And Salahuddin said, no, we haven't. And I said, again, and Salahuddin got frustrated, and he said, uskut, he goes, be quiet. We won't defeat them until that tent, it was a red tent, until that red tent drops, then we defeated them. And what happened? As soon as Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah said that, the red tent dropped. And they captured all the kings. Why is this red tent important? Because when you're on top of a hill, naturally the kings don't come into battle. They just watch from the hilltop, right? And they obviously watch what's happening. So once you defeat the army or the right flank and the left flank, and you go, it's all military strategy, isn't it? Then you carry on, you're breaking through their barriers, and then you go to the hilltop and capture the leaders. That fulfills it now. That's it. It's done. So they captured them. So anyone who watched Kingdom of Heaven must have come across the scene, the famous scene when they're in Salahuddin Ayyubi's tent, and they bring Reynald de Chatillon, and Guy de Lucian, and Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi gave that cup with ice. That actually is narrated here by Ibn Athir. Ibn Athir mentions this. And he gave the, it says, Prophet, فَقَالَ صَلَاحُ الدِّينِ إِنَّ هَذَا مَلْعُونَ. So what happened was, the mal'oon he's talking about is Renaud de Chatillon. So Renaud had a peace treaty with Salahuddin, so to allow the trade caravans to come through. But he betrayed the treaty and he killed the Muslims and he took their stock and livelihood. So Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah made a promise that if I catch this mal'oon, if I catch this cursed one, he's finished. That's it. So when he gave the ice drink to Guy de Lucian, Guy was the king of Jerusalem. So he gave it to him. And what happened was, Renaud was thirsty, because remember I told you about they lit the fires on the hill and they couldn't have anything to drink? He snatched it off him and drank it. Do you remember that scene in Kingdom of Heaven? Does anyone remember it? He gives it to him. Or he gives it to him over here, it says he snatches it. So he said to him, Lam yashrib ma bi-idni. I did not give you anything to drink with my permission, to Renaud de Chatillon. So Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi basically said, فَقَامَ إِلَيْهِ بِنَفْسِهِ. So he stood up to go next to him, فَضَرَبَ رَقَبَتَهُ, and struck his neck. And that happens in the movie as well, by the way. So that is true. So there's some element of truth in that, because we're going from our primary sources. So now Salahuddin al-Ayyubi has destroyed the Crusader army. They launched it, so I didn't mention it, but the army that marched from the Kingdom of Jerusalem to northern Palestine, because the Battle of Hattin happened in northern Palestine, they just used all their resources. Because they thought, we're losing territory, we've got to stop this. And if we don't defeat this army, then they're just going to keep coming and coming and coming. So they took the whole resource to Hattin. So now what happened was, Salahuddin was taking territory. They took Akka, they took Nablus, they took Haifa, they took Qaisari, they took Asqalan. Now Asqalan is like near the south, near Gaza. Now Asqalan is where Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani is from. Okay, originally. That's why his name is Asqalani, because he's from, in Hebrew is Ashqalan. I'm studying Hebrew a bit, so I've got a bit of Hebrew in me. But Ashqalan, then you got Ashdod, and you got all of these areas. So now we're getting to the conquest, and he mentions here, ذكر فتح البيت المقدس المبارك الشريف حرسه الله تعالى. So now the chapter of when Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi took Bayt al-Maqdis. Now I'm going to fast forward a bit. He took it over, alhamdulillah. Beautiful. Took it over, they surrendered it. And do you remember what I mentioned about the Pearl Mimbar? Do you remember the Pearl Mimbar that Nuruddin had? He called for that Mimbar, and this was the date, and again it's not, affirmed by the Quran and the Sunnah, 27 Rajab, the 27th of Rajab. This happened. And this is where they say that the Isra wal Mi'raj happened on the 27th. So he took it on that day. So, Allahu Alam, it probably is true, but he took it on the 27th. So what happened was, he brought the Pearl Mimbar into Baytul Maqdis. And it was on the day of Jum'ah as well. So, subhanAllah, so everything's fitting in just right. And there was an individual by the name Az-Zaki, very eloquent speaker. And Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi asked Az-Zaki to give the khutbah of Jum'ah. Now Az-Zaki is in the army of Salahuddin. This is the time to it's Salahuddin's pivotal moment, taking Baytul Maqdis after 90 plus years. Az-Zaki, when he gave the Jum'ah khutbah, did not mention Salahuddin al-Ayyubi once. Just praised Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, thanked him, and narrated the virtues of Quds. Not once did he mention Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah. Can you believe that? Because these are the people that weren't living for fame, weren't living for accolades. They were doing for lillah, they were mukhlis lillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's an important message that we have to send to ourselves. That I'm addressing this message to myself first before everyone else. Your niyyah has to be khalis in anything you do. Anything you do, your niyyah has to be khalis, to the best of our ability. Because shaitan, inna shaitana yajri min insani majra dam. That insan goes through your veins the way blood goes through your veins. So it's always possible that your niyyah can sway. But look at the nobleness, the sort of chivalry of Salahuddin. He just sat back and just listened to the khutbah. Didn't really give any second thoughts that his name had been mentioned. Like nowadays, one ruler has a little piece of land, and Al-Malik, Al-Adil, Al-Sharif, Al-Dis, Al-Batal, and all of these titles come, and they only probably own I'm from the West Midlands, like a little territory in Warsaw or something. And he's the greatest king and this and that. But he wasn't interested in that. Now that he's taken Baytul Maqdis, he cleaned the Aqsa, He put rose water on the grounds of the Aqsa. So another important point I think I need to raise as well is that Al-Aqsa isn't, and I think it's important because we're on the topic, Al-Aqsa isn't the two mosques. Okay, it's very important because people do ask a lot of questions regarding, I just see Qubat al-Sakhra, the dome of the rock, and then you see the Marwani Aqsa, the grey dome, and these are the two Aqsa. The Aqsa is ma bayna sawar or bayna sawar, like whatever's between the two walls. The actual land is the Aqsa. You see, the land is Aqsa. So if you pray on, just say outside of the mosque, you're still technically praying in Masjid al-Aqsa. Okay. So did anyone know that? I'm sure everyone was aware of that, but did anyone know that? The whole compound. The whole compound is Aqsa. Now, you got to remember, the compound Aqsa is higher up now because of the stairs and the built, obviously, a lot of, the Mamalik obviously reconstructed it and it's very beautiful. But the Aqsa is the whole land. How many square kilometers is it? Yeah, it's massive. And that's where the Prophet ﷺ, while adding religious significance into it, in Islam, is where the Prophet ﷺ went to on his night journey. When Khadija radiallahu anha passed away and Abu Talib passed away, the Prophet was going through a lot of grief. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, arranged this, momentous event that by night Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam from Mecca to Baytul Maqdis in one night. Then to the heavens, he led the prophets in prayer. So this is where the special reward is for Baytul Maqdis, even though the whole of Sham is blessed. Alladhi barakna hawlahu. The whole land of Sham, Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan is the blessed land. In contrast to the Hijaz, only Mecca and Medina are blessed. The rest of the lands isn't. Ta'if, Riyadh, Dammam, Uyayna, Dar'iyya. Well, Dar'iyya, naturally I would make that mention, Muhammad Abdul Wahab. But the whole land, so Asham is blessed generally. So moving on now, Salahuddin rahmatullah alayhi now wants to focus on the Sahil. He wants to focus on the coastal areas now. Why? Think about it. Why does he want to focus on the coastal areas? Protection and supplies. So if he takes over the coastal regions, so the coastal regions in Palestine is Akka, Haifa, Tel Aviv, or Tel Aviv in Arabic. Those areas, and even Lebanon, then you got Trablus and all the Lebanese, he setting his sights on those areas. So if he can besiege them and take these territories, he controls the sea. So the Crusaders from Cyprus or whatever it may be, from Italy, where they're going to get resupply, they can't get resupply, they can't last, or they can't extend a siege, or nor can they get supplies, so they're going to be naturally starving, right? SubhanAllah, like they're doing to our brothers and sisters in Palestine right about now. There's a huge outcry regarding the lack of aid that's getting in. So now, where it gets very, very important regarding the struggles of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi. Are you keeping up with me, by the way? I'm not boring you. It's not too much information, but going into the struggles of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi. Now, Europe has heard that Jerusalem or Bayt al-Maqdis has been taken. And I'm sure I read somewhere when the Pope heard about it, he collapsed and died, didn't he? From what I've heard. No, the one after, the Pope after. Yeah, I've heard about that. How true is Allahu A'lam? But apparently the Pope heard about the news and collapsed. Alayhi la'natullah. So the Crusaders now, or the European states, are outraged. 90 years we controlled Baytul Maqdis from the hands of the Saracens. Now these barbarians have taken the land of Jesus Christ and the land of God or the Holy Spirit or whoever. We need to take this back. So what happened? They launched the Third Crusade. The Third Crusade was launched, and this is one of the biggest crusades ever. The King of Germany, Barbarossa, they said, and it's mentioned, that he raised an army of 200,000 himself from Germany. And then forget about the surrounding kingdoms. They raised armies, so now the first crusade was big. This is bigger than the first crusade. This is now to recapture Baytul Maqdis. So let's go into an account. So Ibn Athir, back to Ibn Athir again, he mentions, right, that he says that if it weren't for the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this ummah, by killing the German king, so what happened was he raised an army of 200,000, he's on the way, he's taking territory, and then the German king died. And Bahadin ibn Shaddad, I'm sort of mixing between the two, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi heard about this, that there's a news of 200,000 crusaders coming. And when he heard about this, he says, وَإِشْتَدَّ ذَلِكَ, like he felt like severe, like worried that 200,000 are coming to take over Baytul Maqdis. So Ibn Athir rahmatullahi alayhi mentions, and he said, if it wasn't for the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this ummah, we would be saying today that Egypt and Syria was one day Muslim. Meaning that, like here today, for example, if that did happen, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not kill the German king, what that meant was he drowned. He drowned, didn't he? He was coming from a horse and he drowned into the, like it wasn't even a river, he just drowned. He was ill and he fell off his horse and drowned. So what happened was the Germans, we'll forget this, so a large portion of them went back when the king passed away. So if it wasn't for the grace of Allah for this ummah, we would be saying today, and Ibn Athir is narrating this, who's in the 6th century, he's saying one day, like that time, so forget about this time, we would be saying one day Syria and Egypt were once Muslim, because they would have taken it over. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala killed the German king. The German king now has passed away, and what happened? The kings of Europe were still outraged by the Muslim victory in Hattin and taking over Baytul Maqdis. Another king decided to come and fight for Baytul Maqdis, to take it back from the Muslims. Have you heard of Richard the Lionheart? Yeah, Richard the Lionheart. Richard the Lionheart was the king of England. So he was the king of England, but he was actually of French ancestry, wasn't he? Yeah. So he was actually French, but he was the king of England. So the king of England heard about obviously what happened to Barbarossa. Well, you could say he probably didn't hear. He probably was going to launch a crusade anyway, but he decided to launch a crusade, and he came with supplies and he came with X, Y, and Z. Because you have to remember, these are kings. It's like similar to like when, just say 2003, when they launched an invasion of Iraq. The superpowers at the time, which was who? Britain and America, they launched this illegal war, and they had these stocks and supplies, and they invaded Iraq. So just imagine at that time, 200,000 from Germany, the King of England. We're talking about the superpowers of the time coming to Asham, and you know Asham isn't very big. So if you've got empires coming with over 400,000 or 500,000, it's going to be a very, very difficult task to hold them back, right? So on top of that, to make matters even severe for Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, there was an individual, and it says ذِكْرُ وُصُولَ الْقُنْدَرُ. He is the Count of Henry II. He's a French king, and he decided to also partake as well. So now you've got the King of England, you've got Count Henry, all common European kings, and Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi so remember what I talked about Guy de Lusignan when he got captured? They paid a ransom, a huge ransom, and Guy was then released. And he went back. But then he started his crusading activities again. So Guy was actually released. So they started taking territory. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi was losing territory. And they besieged Akka. Akka. Do you know where Akka is in Palestine? Akka is a very beautiful place. It's on the coastal region. So now Muslims are getting besieged because they were landing in Cyprus and they were regrouping in Cyprus, and then they were coming by sea into Akka. And it was a lengthy siege. Like they were attacking the Muslims, and obviously the Muslim supplies, obviously we had to get it from Beirut to obviously regroup, but they couldn't because of the Crusaders. So it was a naval war. There was a naval war happening. Now what happened was, there was an individual, there's a very important story. There's an individual by the name, and it says, ذِكْرُ قِصَّةِ Awam Isa rahmatullah alayhi. This is Bahaddini mentioned, it's the swimmer. So what Isa used to do, he used to swim to the city at night. So come, swim into the city and give like information, like, you know, what we should be doing, and regrouping them and giving them letters and whatnot. And one day his body went missing, so he used to come back and forth. They never used to know. He used to swim, come into the city and give messages and swim back. But one time he passed away and they found his body, and on his waist he had gold coins and seals of letters from the wali and the governors. So that's why I'm highlighting this, is to show the extent of how the Muslims had to get information through, because they were getting besieged in Akka and they couldn't really go and give information if they were being besieged. So they had to use different means and sort of get as much information to the army as possible in terms of direction. Now the King of England has arrived now. He's in the principalities which the Crusaders control. They're there now. And the King of England has brought so much supplies, so much men, and the Crusaders now are motivated They feel that, you know, we're now at a stage where we can now fight back. We've got all of this support, all of these supplies. It's a good time for the Crusaders. That's what they thought. So it mentions now that Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi, because Akka is getting besieged, he needs to send supplies to Akka, right? It's a siege, so he needs to send supplies. So from Beirut, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi through his governor sent some supplies. And this is the chapter, and this is mentioned in Nawadir al-Sultaniyya on page 244, Dhikrul al-Ghariq, or al-Gharaq, of the ship, the Islamic ship. And what happened was, when they were coming, they had supplies, military supplies, food and whatnot, and the Crusaders got tipped off that they were coming. So most of the time what they used to do is they used to do it by night, so, you know, under the cover of darkness. But they got tipped off that they were coming. So they surrounded the ship. Now the captain Yaqub decided that, look, we can't, they're going to take the ship, they're going to take the supplies, they're going to take us as captives. So what did he do? He mentioned that they decided to open gaps in the ship, you know, holes. So put some holes in the ship. And he mentions clearly that they didn't allow themselves to be captives, nor the equipment. And the Sultan was sad. And he responded by saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not, you know, look at or does not reward the efforts. To the point, that's how much the Muslims were struggling with the siege of the Crusaders, Richard the Lionheart and all the other Crusader principalities. So letters came now, and the Muslims pledged to fight to the death. It's getting difficult now. They can't hold the siege. And the Crusaders entered into Akka, a very important port city, but an important strategic city in Asham was lost. So why I'm emphasizing about the history of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi, we don't hear about post-conquest of Jerusalem about these struggles and tribulations that he faced. He lost the city of Akka. And the Crusaders entered and raised the crosses all over the walls and city. And he mentions ذِكْرُ إِسْطَيْلَ الْعَدُوء عَلَى الْعَقَّةِ, that the mentioning of the overpowerment or conquering of the enemy of Akka. And this is under page 257. Now, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi heard about this, and he's in Baytul Maqdis. So he's heard about this, and news has reached him that Akka has lost. So Salahuddin was upset, because now what's happened? Muslims are being captured. Muslim women, children, men are now under the mercy or under the control of the Crusaders. So they're prisoners of war. Thousands upon thousands. So Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi sent a man called Ibn Barik on a mission to settle the matters, to somehow come to a negotiation to get the captives released, to get obviously some sort of negotiation, even if we have to pay ransoms, because now Muslim lives are at risk. Okay? And the Crusaders, funny enough, it's very strange, they said that, okay, what we want first, before we negotiate anything, do you know what they asked for, according to Bahaddin? We want to see the true cross. We want to see the true cross. Before we even start any negotiation, show us the true cross. So when it was it mentioned here, it says when it was presented to them, they started rubbing their faces with it. They started rubbing their faces like, this is the true cross. This is the cross where Isa alayhi salam was crucified on. So they started rubbing their faces, and they couldn't come to an agreement though. So they couldn't come to an agreement. The Muslims, they tried to negotiate, and the Muslims took back the cross. So when the King of England heard about that there was no further updates, because remember, the kings never used to negotiate. Like Salahuddin never used to negotiate himself. He used to have his own wazirs and wuzara. And Salahuddin as well. They never used to go to Akka himself and negotiate. Sent his trusted wazirs to go and do it for him. So when Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi, they also asked, by the way, I forgot to mention, they asked for some money, like a ridiculous amount of money for ransom for the Muslims, and the true cross and other things as well. But it was non-negotiable. So when it was confirmed that the negotiations weren't going anyway, the Crusaders marched outside, okay, between Tal Katana and Tal Adaya. And so the Muslims are outside now, and they're on top of this particular Tal, this hill, and they had with them 3,000 Muslims tied. So the Muslims are watching this, and what did they do? They executed every single one of them on that hill. And the Muslims are watching this, watching 3,000. So they moved them from Akka, took them to this hill which they controlled, 3,000 Muslims, and executed them one by one. And the Muslims are actually watching this while this was happening. So when Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi heard about this, he fell into tears. And he was very, very upset. He couldn't negotiate the release of one Muslim life. What's the hadith in Ibn Majah? That وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ لَحُرْمَةُ الْمُؤْمِنِ أَعْظَمُ مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ حُرْمَةَ مِنْكِ مَالِهِ وَدَمِهِ. Like the one Muslim life is more sanctified than the Kaaba. Imagine 3,000 Muslims dead. And the Muslims couldn't do nothing about it. This is the struggles I'm talking about. This is why you have to remember that Muslims would have times of hardship. Even our noble Prophet ﷺ, in the early part of his Nabuwa, when they boycotted him for 3 years, was it?
Yeah.
About 3 years. Went through struggles, went through tribulations. Then on top of that, the migration, Hijrah. Then after Hijrah, we had the Uhud. Then after Uhud, leave about his daughters, passing away and his sons passing away. That was the Prophet ﷺ went through so much. Then Khandaq, Ma'rakat al-Ahzab. Now you heard about was it 12,000 at that time? It was a lot, huge, wasn't it? Khandaq, about 14,000, yeah. Ghathifan, like these sort of, Christian crusaders who were just tagging along. The biggest army ever seen. Very troubling time. So the state of the Ummah today, post Uthmani Khilafah, we're seeing, Mustawtinin, Istimara, we're seeing all sorts of issues. And what I'm trying to highlight and emphasize is that every single issue facing the Muslim Ummah we've been through before. You see? We've been through before. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests his ibad, especially those in terms of religious commitment. As per the hadith, the most severely tested are the Anbiya, then the one according to their religious commitment. So it shows Sha'b al-Falastini, Afghani, Iraq, and all of these areas, they must be beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for Allah to put them through these tribulations. Kashmir, various, even the colonization, the imperialism of the early 20th century where European states colonized the whole region, in fact. Belgium colonized certain regions, Italy, Umar Mukhtar, and then you had, the Maghreb being colonized, and you had Al-Hind from the British. You see that time? And it's like 100 years have passed, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed this test on the Ummah again to see how we will react. And it's important to note that dua is very important. Don't think dua doesn't go a long way. There's a riwayah or an athar from Maruq al-Ijli, who's from the Tabi'een. And he mentioned, he goes, دَعَوْتُ رَبِّي لِهَاجَةٍ وَعِشْرِينَ سَنَةٍ. He said, I made dua to my Lord for 20 years, for my needs. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not decree it. But I don't despair that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not answer my du'as. Look at that. So don't ever think that dua will not make a difference. Or كما قال يستجاب لأحدكم ما لم يعجل فقال دعوته فلم يستعجب لي. That your du'as will always, كما قال, it's authentic hadith, that the Prophet said, your du'as will always be accepted, providing you're not hasty. Don't be hasty. That the person says, دعوته فلم يستعجب لي, that I made dua that it didn't come true. So Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi ordered an Egyptian army, right, to come and take back those territories. So Richard, the Lionheart, well, the cat, we could call him, lion. But Richard heard about this and he attacked the Muslim army. Listen to this. So Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah is doing whatever he can within his power, within his capability to free the Muslim lands and free the Muslims from the shackles of the Crusaders in Akka and other areas they've taken over. So what happened? Spies, whoever watched Ertugrul, there's always jawasis everywhere, right? Giving information here and there. And they found out that there was an army coming. What happened? They attacked the army, attacked the caravan, and resulted in many Muslims being killed, on top of many dirhams and danarir being taken. So you see the struggles I'm talking about? Every point post to Jerusalem, it's just nothing but worries for Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi. Very much. So what happened? Jerusalem is now a target for the Crusaders, literally. To the point now they're working their way down to Jerusalem. This is to the extent of how close they were taking Jerusalem. They were on the way to Jerusalem. And then Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi heard about their plans to come. So what did he do? He strengthened the city walls and called the Amir to prepare for a siege. That's how much they were worried that Jerusalem will be taken back by the Crusaders. So he called to strengthen certain parts of the wall to make sure that they can last a siege. Because, you've watched Kingdom of Heaven, right? You got those catapults and they're throwing it in. You got to strengthen those city walls. And what did Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi did with his hikmah? He started poisoning the water outside of Jerusalem. Started poisoning it. That's how worried he was. So when a siege happens, you need to have water, wells, so they could drink from. So he started poisoning them. That's how much the fear was that they'll take back Jerusalem. Even more so that now the Crusaders are coming from northern Palestine into Quds. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi called for a council. So he's worried, like, what should we do? I need support, I need to have advice. Like, literally we might be losing Quds. And the conversation and this is in mentioning ذكر العودة العدو إلى بلادهم والسبب ذلك. So they returned back to the land, but what were the reasons why? Listen to this. It's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was answering the du'as of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi. When they were having this conversation about we're going to have to somehow repel the adu, I remember the numbers that I was mentioning. If Quds has a fortress, right? Like anyone's been in Jerusalem, you see the walls, right? And if you've got 100,000, 200,000 strong with supplies, how long are you going to last? Not going to last long, are you? So the Amirs were telling him, they said, look, this is the conversation that we're having to show you how detrimental the situation was for Salahuddin. They said, look, our forces can survive with Quds. Let's leave Quds. If we lose it, it's fine. But the lands of Islam will be sustained for a while without Quds. That was the conversation that we're having. That we might lose Quds. It's possible. We might lose it. But as long as the lands of Islam are sustained, we might have to lose Quds for a while. This is the threat that was facing the Muslims at that time, where Baytul Maqdis was potentially going to be lost. So Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi sent some spies. So now the spies went out to see what was happening. So they must have been embedded, like, when you watch Ertugrul, you always find someone with a Christian robe on, finding out information, sending the pigeon to find out what's happening. And the spies started encountering that there was some disputes amongst the Crusader army. There were some issues amongst the Crusader army. And they were disputing amongst themselves. Now Richard, being a wise man, he was very wise. He knew that even if he takes Baytul Maqdis, it was quite possible that conversation between themselves was happening, that we'll take Quds and, But Richard was smart. He was saying, okay, that's fine. Even if we take it, would we be able to sustain holding it? That was a conversation, and they started disputing. So Bahadin mentioned, and I'm trying to get the quote because there's so much stuff here. Yeah, this is page 322, sorry. And they said, so the Crusaders are responding, the Al-Franj responded by saying, we only came for Quds, and you think we're going to return without it? So they were having this dispute amongst them. They said, why did you make us come here then? We came all the way to take Quds. We're on the door of Baytul Maqdis, and you're telling us that we can't take it, we have to return back. So Richard responded by saying, how are you going to take it? How are you going to besiege them when they poison the waters around Baytul Maqdis? How are you going to take it? How are you going to survive? We could be here for months besieging them, and we got no water. And it's not as if they've got Teslas and Mercedes that they could drive from Quds to Nablus or the West Bank. It's all on horseback and camel. So they were having a serious dispute amongst themselves where they were arguing and they were having issues. So they eventually agreed to make peace. So now, but why though? Think about it. If I left my homeland by horseback and camel, well, Europe wouldn't have camels, but just say by horseback, and I left from England, France, going all the way by land to reach Baytul Maqdis, the whole intent for me leaving my territory, my comfort zone, is to take Baytul Maqdis. All of a sudden, I'm just going to turn back. Just like that. It's not like they could catch a flight from Tel Aviv airport to land in, Charles de Gaulle in Paris. They'll have to come back again, go travel, catch a ship, They decide to make peace. Now, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi heard about this and he was shocked. Like all of a sudden they want peace. They want to negotiate peace. So Richard had a good relationship with a man called Abu Bakr Adil. They had a good relationship. And he asked for Abu Bakr al-Adil with a few Muslims to negotiate terms now, so that we could stop this war. We could stop this, conflict. And they were negotiating, and Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullahi alayhi sent him along with other men. And look what he said. Now Richard's talking to Abu Bakr al-Adil, and he said to him, and this is in page 338, he said, Hada Sultan Azim. So Richard speaking to Abu Bakr al-Adil, and he said, your Sultan is great. Richard saying this about Salahuddin. And he said, وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ لِلْإِسْلَامِ مَلَكْ أَكْبَرْ وَلَا أَعْظَمْ مِنْهُ. There is no king in the land of Islam which is greater, bigger, and more powerful than him. So they had this mutual respect for each other. Richard saying this to Abu Bakr al-Adil. So he said that sometimes I heard that Salahuddin was going to come take a city. And I thought it's going to take a couple of months if he's going to take it. And he took it in a couple of days. That's how great Salahuddin is. Strategic, military genius. And when Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi, they were going back and forth for a while. So to negotiate terms, especially... 5 minutes, I'm finishing up. So if there were some issues, if the issues that they were negotiating surrender, or not surrender, shall I say, when they're negotiating terms, it took a while. And then they were going back and forth, and Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi said to his wazirs, this is his exact words, if they give up Ashkelon, make peace with them. If they give up Ashkelon. So if they give up Ashkelon, that's fine, make peace with them. Because the army is tired of constant campaigning and our resources are exhausted. That's how much Salahuddin exhausted so much effort. It's just, if they give up Ashkelon, that's fine, just agree whatever, because our army is tired now. Huge, problems and tribulations he faced post the conquest of Jerusalem. So I need to wrap up now. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah, when it says dhikru tamam as-sulh, when they agreed the sulh, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah departed from Jerusalem to Damascus. So where was his original capital? In Damascus. Okay, and he fell ill on the 27th of Safar. He fell ill. And he got ill for about 12 nights, which eventually grew worse and worse. And he had a Qadi with him, Qadi al-Fadil and Ibn al-Zaki. Do you remember mentioning Ibn al-Zaki at the time when he did the khutbah in Bayt al-Maqdis? And Bahadin ibn Shiddad mentioned that when Abu Ja'far, who was with him, recited the verse next to him, they were reciting Quran, La ilaha illa huwa alayhi tawakkaltu. He got to this verse, he passed away. Then Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah passed away, and he was buried in Damascus, and his son took over al-Zahir, and the Muslims still had to face off the Crusaders, and it was a back and forth, for many years. Then the Ayyubi dynasty then obviously finished, then the Mamalik took over, and then a great leader by the name of Ar-Rukn ad-Din al-Zahir Baybaz. Have you heard that name before? Ar-Rukn ad-Din al-Zahir Baybaz. He completely finished off the Crusaders, and they returned back to Europe and didn't return until World War I. And we know what's happened since then. So that's the great life of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi. Concise, I can't do justice to his life and history in the space of, how long, an hour or so. But just to give you a bit of insight into the struggles, his chivalry, his attributes, his characteristics. And on top of that, the most important thing why I've decided to come today to talk about his struggles. And these struggles were manifested in different ways, whether it was loss of Muslim life, territory, health, worry, everything combined. And we are facing that in our times today. And it's just to say, don't lose hope, that we are seeing so much issues. We are seeing loss of life. We're seeing pictures on the daily, on our social media platforms regarding what's happening in Gaza and elsewhere. Just remember that the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even if they are down, and if we are struggling with colonization and all sorts, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never forsake us. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless every single one of you who've come out. I hope this talk was beneficial and you've benefited. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to unite us as He united us today under His shade on a day where there will be no shade except His shade. So take care of yourselves. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad.